Hello, good afternoon to everyone, and welcome to the Family Childcare Network's Pre-Application Technical Assistance webinar. I want to welcome everyone today. We're just going to allow a few minutes for all of our registered participants to join us. I just want to take a moment to thank many people, my lead for affording us the opportunity to continue to scale family child care networks across Michigan. I want to thank our 9 continuation family child care network hubs. They've been amazing partners and really helped us learn and grow our understanding of the power of a comprehensive network strategy, which you'll be hearing more about soon. And I want to thank our technical assistance partners. While they won't be joining us today, they're really important to supporting the implementation of this work. And that's Homegrown, which is a national organization devoted to the preservation and expansion of home-based childcare, and the Erickson Institute, who works as a partner with Homegrown and with whom ECIC anticipates partnering on this initiative going forward. I think we're ready to move to the next slide. So for our agenda today, we have 3 big buckets, so to speak, that we'll be focused on during our time together. And we are scheduled to be together for about 2 hours today. We wanted to allow sufficient time for us both to present the content and information that you'll need to submit a successful application and also to answer your questions. And I'll be talking more about how you can do that here in just a minute. So what will we be talking about today? We're going to do a brief introduction to the Child Care Innovation Fund and this particular Family Child Care Network funding opportunity. And then we're going to segue into talking about the funding opportunities specifically, who's eligible, what does it mean to add the new hubs, the application timeline, et cetera. And then we'll spend a good chunk of time really reviewing the specific application questions, how to use the portal, and our selection process. If you do need translated captions, this meeting is enabled for that. So to access translated captions, you can see at the top of the slide, you're going to want to go to your bottom Zoom bar where you click more. You can click then on the captions icon, and then there's a little switch there that says translation. And what you do is select your preferred language. If you need to modify the caption size or color so it's more easily readable for you, you click on the captions again, and this time click on the captions setting in the menu. I want to do a little bit of housekeeping. As I said, we're scheduled to be here for up to 2 hours. We will end as soon as our content is complete and questions have been addressed. This webinar is being recorded and will be shared with those in attendance, including slides, and we'll talk more about where you're going to find that at the close of this webinar. In order to preserve our audio quality and to make sure that we're able to get through all the information we need to share with you, all participants will be muted throughout, and you'll submit all questions through the Q&A button. And you can see there's a little icon on the screen that shows you what that looks like. And then what's great is that questions here can be viewed by everybody. So you can see if somebody else has already got your question you had in your mind, and you can upvote it if you want to make sure that we address it on this webinar. Next slide. So very, very pleased to introduce our hosts and speakers today. I'm Joan Blau. I'm the Senior Director of the Child Care Innovation Fund and the Project Director for the Family Child Care Network Project. We have Sebastian Betzler here, who's our Innovation Associate, who's been helping us lead the Family Child Care Network pilot. Courtney D'Angelo, who's our Senior Implementation Consultant. Misty Conley Rogers, who is the Child Care Innovation Fund Project Manager. And then we have Andrea Ayat and Kelly Kreider, who are from our operations department here at ECIC and are here to help talk you through the application, the budget, and the risk assessment. So very pleased to have everyone here today, and you'll get a chance to hear from everybody over the course of the webinar. Our learning objectives for this webinar are for all participants to be able to summarize the purpose and the goals of the Family Child Care Network project. So we'll be focusing a little bit on that as we get going. As a result of being here today, you will be able to determine your organizational eligibility for the Family Child Care Network funding opportunity. We think you'll be able to describe and understand what our application review and selection process is. We hope you'll walk away from our time together today understanding, at least at a basic level, how you'll use our brand new online portal. And we're using a platform called Flux to submit an application and related application materials. And last but certainly not least, we'll be talking about the technical assistance that's available to any interested applicants after this webinar, and you'll be able to know how to choose the technical assistance opportunity that is a good fit for your needs. I want to start out by making it clear that this funding opportunity will not award an individual licensed childcare provider or business. What is possible is that a group of home-based childcare providers could seek a fiscal sponsor who would agree to be the applicant organization, and if selected, our grantee or subrecipient. A fiscal sponsor would be accountable to ECIC's Child Care Innovation Fund for the programmatic and financial outcomes of this competitive funding opportunity. And this is defined and explained further in the request for proposals. Who is eligible for this funding opportunity are nonprofit organizations that are classified under Section 501c3 of the Internal Revenue Code and are not classified as a private foundation. And as I said, a 501c3 organization acting as a fiscal sponsor for a group of home-based providers for the purposes of this grant opportunity. If you are interested in using a fiscal sponsor, I would highly encourage you again to schedule with us and have an office hours where we can talk to you about how that would work. Next slide. Before we get going and on the specific funding opportunity, we want to make sure to share a bit more about ECIC's Child Care Innovation Fund, which was funded in 2021 to collaborate with regional and community partners to pilot common sense and financing solutions for childcare. Since that time, we've invested in a variety of innovations that have been designed specifically to benefit employers, working families, childcare business owners, and early educators. All the work that we do includes active work to educate and then to advocate for scaling proven childcare solutions across Michigan. And we recently produced our impact report for 2024. And if you're interested in learning more about the work that we've been doing, I would highly recommend that you take a look at our impact report, which is on ECIC's website. The Child Care Innovation Fund has 5 big priorities that it focuses on. In particular, this opportunity is about strengthening childcare businesses, building childcare supply, and ultimately continuing to improve compensation and on-the-job supports for early educators, which include home-based childcare providers and license exempt providers. In all the work that we do across all of our funding opportunities, we center equity at every level, including through our grant review and selection process, which you will hear more about later in this webinar. And then we're going to take our first pause here, just a quick pause to see if we should have any questions that we want to answer here at the top of the webinar before I turn it over to Sebastian.
We don't have any questions that have been entered into the Q&A yet. I'm just going to give a little bit of a shout out to our attendees. Please do use that Q&A function as things come up for you throughout the webinar. We will use the questions that are submitted here to further inform a frequently asked questions document that we have started to develop. So that'll be an additional resource available to you all following this webinar. So anytime you might have wondering, others might have it too, feel free to pop it in. Thanks.
Thanks, Misty. And I'll turn it over to Sebastian.
Thanks so much, Joan. And hello, everyone. I'm glad you're all here today. I am going to talk to you a little bit about the FCCN project and really specifically get into what FCCNs are, what is the idea behind them, and how does it really work. So to start with, just thinking broadly about family childcare networks and their scope of work, how we view all of the hubs that we have funded. We think of this as a broad strategy that will provide home-based childcare providers, business owners, license-exempt providers. So this is like your licensed home-based childcare, as well as license-exempt providers, and also home-based providers who are becoming or in the process of becoming licensed. And what does the network do? So the network gathers together a group of up to 25 providers, and the focus is on building business owner connections and sharing of effective practices that promote well-being. And this works because providers, home-based providers, they know their own context, they know their own community, and they know their own challenges. And by bringing providers together who are typically isolated, it's a really valuable and powerful way to successfully overcome a lot of the barriers that are faced by this community and help them to grow and strengthen. So you can see that in the second part of that scope of work, a lot of the goals that we're working on is to offer tools and training to increase provider capacity, but also to enhance their quality practices. And then finally, and I would say most importantly, there's also a very strong focus in family childcare networks on tangible business and financial support that promotes solutions and sustainability of those businesses. And so when we're talking about business and financial support, we're really looking at things that go beyond one-off resources or benefits. It is a function of FCCNs that they can provide resources and training. But what we're really looking for when we think about FCCNs broadly is creating a strategy of how those resources that are provided to home-based providers are embedded and then become something that provider is overall strengthened by, so that they can go on and have a much, much, much more sustainable business and feel comfortable and empowered in the care that they provide in their home. Next slide, please. So what we're talking about today is the network hub that is at the center of what we call a comprehensive network strategy. So this application that we're referring to is to be this connective tissue at the middle that you see at the middle of this diagram. And that arrow is perfect. That really shows what we're talking about. So the network hub, like I mentioned before, brings together groups of up to 25 home-based childcare providers. And those arrows that you see moving out from the hub are the things that the hub provides to those home-based childcare business owners, license-exempt providers, and folks getting licensed. So that may be support with quality. That may be support with business and sustainability, comprehensive services. So really making sure that families and children are able to be connected to the services that they need really effectively, and that the referral process isn't overly burdensome on home providers. And then also providing for provider well-being. We've seen in the pilot that we did last year, there was a lot of benefit for providers coming together to support their own mental health, to support their own well-being in what is a challenging industry. And one of the key tenets of this comprehensive network strategy is that the home-based childcare providers that are in the network hub, you'll see that there's an arrow that goes from them to the hub. They inform at every level of how the network runs. Home-based providers are part of that system governance. So they are informing what their specific barriers and needs are, and also what resources and strategies are sort of able to provide a long-term resolution to that. And what we know is that along the way, when the network hub is providing these different resources in these category areas, sometimes it's the case that in an area, there may be policy decisions, licensing rules, there may be larger policy that is impacting home-based providers. And by coming together as a group, the Network Hub really allows home-based providers and the families and children that they serve to have a direct voice in forming that policy. So there are lots of opportunities that can come up as a result of being part of a Network Hub. We've seen in the past folks have really felt empowered to join national level advocacy work for home-based providers. So as a home-based provider, they took that on. We've seen folks gather together to have a stronger voice at events like Capitol Day. And then also we've seen things that have been addressed kind of on a smaller scale, like licensing rules and regulations, or support that providers needed with language supports for understanding and interpreting what those licensing rules really meant and applying them in their home context. And so that's how the home-based childcare providers inform policy. And then the added benefit of this network strategy is that when that policy is informed, the network hubs are also able to take on any of the funding opportunities that become available. They're able to share out new public policy, new licensing rules very effectively with home-based providers who otherwise may be isolated and not gain that information or how to apply it in their context as readily. So I hope that's a brief summary of how everything fits together into this comprehensive network strategy with the network hub at the center. Next slide, please. So we're also, you may be thinking, okay, well, what does a network look like? What are the very specific things that we're supposed to do in this network? And the answer to that question is that there's actually a ton of opportunity, and it depends on what is best for the providers that you're serving. So what we want to see in an application is that provider voice is very clearly at the center of what works best for them in this particular network. However, we do have strong standards that are evidence-based, and we got those from the organization Homegrown that has a lot of experience with family childcare networks around the nation, and they and the Erickson Institute have put together a series of benchmarks that are really, the way to think about those are questions that you can ask yourself about what you're proposing in the network and see if it answers those questions. So they fall into three sort of broad categories of benchmark. There's the why benchmarks, and that's really like, if you answer those questions, it's like, why does this network exist? What is its underlying purpose? And so you'll see in there are things like a focus on home-based childcare, which is really about making sure that the network, however it operates, is ensuring that home-based childcare is seen as essential, not only for its members, but also for the community more broadly. You might see in there also, why does it exist? It exists to have providers be partners in the work, providers in networks governance, partners in network governance, partners in decision making, and partners in overall accountability, making sure that the providers who are part of the network are giving feedback on what's relevant to them and what's working well, and also what's not working. Sometimes, networks can bring together activities and get feedback that it didn't work as well for a specific reason, but that helps the group overall to focus in on those resources that are actually going to make a lasting difference. Then there are also benchmarks that are listed under the how section, and those are really important to read up on. And I saw that Heather posted in the chat a excellent link to these benchmarks where you can read in more detail about what they all mean. But these how benchmarks are really important because they talk about how the network should be governed. And so it talks about the staffing, the recruitment, and then also important things like how to use data to inform what services are provided to providers. And then finally, the what benchmarks, those are those things that we talked about on the last slide. Those are the categories of benefit that should be going to providers. And like we mentioned before, home-based providers have a really important role to play in determining or sharing what works well for them and what will be effective. Next slide, please. So as Joan mentioned, we're very excited to already have had a chance to work in the pilot year with 9 hubs operating 22 networks. And so this is just a sort of sense of the geography that's currently covered, but also these are great organizations to reach out to if you have questions about how they have currently been operating. Next slide, please. We also have recently in December had a webinar about our pilot implementation. So we had 1 year of the Family Childcare Network work that has already concluded. And we had a webinar talking about the evaluation of that pilot. And that has some key learnings that we had that kind of inform what we're trying to do now as we move forward into a continued Family Childcare Network implementation. Heather has just posted the report in the chat and also a link to the recording. So if you can go to the next slide, please. These are the sort of top line things that we learned to help us move beyond what we were able to achieve in the pilot. And those things are focusing on a strategic implementation of the quality benchmarks. We'll talk about that a little bit more when we talk about the actual application. But really it is, again, a reminder that we're going to be focusing on those benchmarks. The project plan is focused on those benchmarks. And that's really going to be at the core of how we talk about success in this project. Building capacity to collect comprehensive data through additional data tools is another thing that we're focused on. That's something that you'll also be a part of in this work if you're successful in being funded, is that we're going to take part in a lot more intentional data collection that allows us to really support, again, that informing of policy decisions based on provider voice. Also, another recommendation of the report is that MyLeap establish an advisory group for the home-based pre-K pilot. So it's an understanding that being part of this work within FCCN is also to inform and to help shape the future of home-based pre-K and what that might look like. And then finally, and the reason we're all here today is that a recommendation of this evaluation was that we expand the coverage of FCCN hubs to statewide coverage. And so what that would mean is that by the end of this year, we have, at the very least, the possibility for networks to spring up anywhere in the state of Michigan. Next slide, please. Oh, great. And so we have now arrived at the questions. So we would definitely be happy to take your questions, anything that's coming up for you right now about FCCNs, what they are, how they operate. And we're going to, just to kind of flag ahead of time, we are going to be moving into more specific details next about the application and what you can expect. So that might give you a sense of where we're at in the presentation. Thanks so much.
We don't have any open questions currently. However, I'll just give another PSA to please put them in there as they arise for you.
And I believe I'm turning it over to Courtney.
Yep. All right. Thanks, Sebastian. So now we are going to share more details, like Sebastian said, about the actual competitive funding opportunity for FCCN. I will give another shout out, though, to all those links that Heather put in the chat about the implementation report and the webinar with that. A lot of really helpful context that goes way beyond what Sebastian was able to share about the report. So if you're curious about what the next year might look like and what we learned from the pilot, please do check those out. Okay, so now let's focus on the competitive funding opportunity. And just a reminder too, that all of this information is covered in the public RFP, which is on our website. And Heather will drop that link in the chat as well for later when you're processing all this information, you can go back and reference it there. So we'll start with a timeline overview. The application portal opened last Friday, January 3rd, and it will close on Friday, January 31st at 5 p.m. This means that the review process will take place during the month of February, and then the selected awardees will be notified in March. And then the initial period of performance will begin starting April 2025 and go into September 2025. The funding opportunity is open to 5 geographic regions. So each applicant will apply to cover one of the following regions that are open. These regions are aligned with the Great Start to Quality Resource Center regions. So all hubs will be eligible for up to 1 network, except for Wayne County, which will be responsible for operating 2 networks to meet the provider population need in the county. The funding opportunity is open to the following regions: the Upper Peninsula, Northeast, Eastern, Central, and Wayne. These regions are shown in color on the Michigan graphic on the screen. If the region is not open for a funding opportunity or grayed out in the graphic, it's because there's already an active hub serving the region. We could go to the next slide. Perfect. Each hub will be responsible for offering FCCN membership to home-based childcare providers and business owners in all associated counties with the region. So note that the RFP does break down the exact counties in each region that coverage is required for. If you're like, I can't read the counties of this map, no worries. It's in the RFP for you and pretty clear there. So now we're going to move on to a table, which is also in the RFP, but it basically outlines the partnership between ECIC and the applicants for this opportunity. This table is helpful in understanding your responsibilities as an applicant, as well as the support ECIC will provide you in accomplishing them. So the first task is that an FCCN hub will continuously serve 25 home-based childcare providers per network. So to accomplish this, the applicant will market the opportunity to join an FCCN within their region, as well as maintain accurate membership records. So that's the responsibility as a hub. And then to support that, ECIC will provide marketing materials, including translated documents for marketing. And we will also provide a membership roster template and clear guidance about what constitutes a member of an FCCN. Just to note here that the 25 number within a network does come from what the research tells us is best practice for provider-based networks. The second task in the table is support the collection and reporting of metrics to child care providers, children, and families. So to accomplish this, the applicant will collect the data on the FCCN project, including outcomes data for providers in their networks and the children and family they serve, as well as report on this data at regular intervals. We're going to talk so much more about this in just a few slides. But to support this, ECIC will provide data collection tools as well as comprehensive TA to support this. Okay, the third task here, so this is just a continuation of the table, is that an FCCN hub will effectively carry out all the required activities as specified in the RFP. So this includes the scope of work, the project plan, and as well as all the requirements for progress reporting. So to accomplish this task, the applicant will budget for provider compensation for participation in network meetings and technical assistance. That's a really important thing. We want to pay providers for their expertise and work within the network. We also have applicants participate in monthly FCCN peer learning communities. And so that peer learning community is then facilitated by the Innovation Fund, and it is required for all FCCN hubs. So all the 5 hubs that are eligible for this funding opportunity, as well as our current 9 hubs as well. And this learning community will focus on peer-to-peer learning, sharing best practices, and provide training from national experts on how to strategically implement the quality benchmarks that Sebastian took us through. So to accomplish this, I already talked about how ECIC will facilitate that monthly peer learning community. We also plan to develop and disseminate technical assistance resources for hubs, as well as we have sort of this open door policy of offering ongoing on-demand consultation and coaching for FCCN hubs, as well as network leaders. Moving on to the final task here, the final row. The task is to comply with state and federal requirements. So this funding is from federal CCDF block grant through MyLeap. So there will be state and federal requirements that are outlined within the RFP. So to accomplish this, the applicant will prepare and submit accurate and timely reports on progress and spending using the ECIC provided templates. Again, we'll share much more about the spending and budget templates later in the webinar. As well as participating in bi-monthly progress meetings where hubs will report on their progress toward achieving what's outlined in their project plan. To support this, ECIC, again, will provide technical assistance and templates to hubs to report on progress and spending. And then answer any questions related to federal guidance for the use of funds. All right, so now we're going to share more about the funding, the funds available and payment schedule for this opportunity. So for this initial period of performance, which we talked about earlier is April to September, applicants may propose budgets of up to $85,000 per network for the initial 6-month period of performance. Calling out here that the only applicants that could propose a budget beyond 85K will be the applicants applying for the Wayne County Hub, which does require 2 networks. Everyone else will be up to $85,000. Noting here that funds available in subsequent years after the September 2025 will be determined by the state's annual legislative appropriation to MyLeap. So regarding the payment schedule, once the contract is in place, the payment schedule will be on a reimbursement basis of actual costs and on a monthly cadence. So as we kind of talked through in the partnership table, hubs will be responsible for progress reporting through bi-monthly progress meetings, as well as both narrative and metrics reporting. Bi-monthly progress reports, bi-monthly progress meetings, will start in April and take place every other month after that. And then narrative and metric reporting will be required at baseline, which is April, mid-year, which is going to be in June, and then end of year, which is then in September. So if we move on, perfect. To the next slide here, we'll kind of get into what will metric reporting include. So hubs will be responsible for collecting comprehensive metrics on their FCCNs, its members, and the children and families served. To give you an idea of the type of metrics that will be required, we have 4 bullet points here that kind of go through that. So the first one is demographic data on the FCCN members, as well as the children and families that they serve. We also will require home-based childcare business sustainability indicators on the FCCN members. So that could look like enrollment, waitlist, and income from childcare, just a few of the potential metrics there, as well as data on the supports and services provided to families and children. So part of the quality benchmarks is that we're providing comprehensive services to children and families. Wraparound services is another way to think about it. So data on the type of services that are provided to children and families. And then finally, the FCCN members' participation in certain quality supports like GSQ. So those are just to give you an idea of the types of metrics that we'll be looking at. Want to talk a little bit about why these metrics are required, right? So the first thing is to understand who is benefiting from the FCCNs and how we can continuously improve what's going on, right? So without clear and comprehensive data, we can't make strategic informed decisions about knowing about who's in FCCN networks and how we can improve the services that are provided. And we also want to ensure that hubs are having the impact that we intend them to have, right? And so that's one reason to improve. And the next reason is to continue to show the valuable impact of FCCNs, right? So referencing the report that we talked about earlier, the data in that report during the pilot year really was what secured the funding for this to be able to continue. There was awesome data about the impact that it was having on home-based businesses and the children and family served. So we want to continue to do that, to continue to secure adequate funding for this initiative. I also want to add here that metrics, that we've been really intentional about the type of metrics that we're requiring. So we don't want to just collect data to collect data, sort of check the box. We have identified meaningful indicators of success, and we've done this through working with national experts like Homegrown, as well as home-based childcare business experts in Wisconsin, working with Erickson. So we've done all of those things, as well as working with our current hubs to vet and inform the metrics. So I want you to hear that, yes, we do require comprehensive metrics, but we also have a lot of data tools and TA that we'll provide. And we really work to make them and make sure that it's meaningful and not just to check the box. A note here that the full list of required metrics and all of the data tools that the fund provides to support collection will be shared when applicants are selected. Of course, if you have further questions about requirements or want more information on what these metrics look like, please reach out via the TA email or set office hours appointments and we can discuss further. We're happy to do that, and you'll get that information at the end of this webinar. Okay, so now we want to move to a timeline that gives you a zoomed out look at the entirety of the FCCN project, which, if you're like me, is helpful for visual folks to sum up much of what we just reviewed. You can see here that January to March is this pre-award time. So we're in the middle of that. It's going to include application, submission, as well as review and selection. Then we move into the period of performance, which is March to September, where you'll see those three little dots represent our 3 progress meetings that we will have. And then that big circle at the end is the indicating that funds need to be liquidated by September 2025 at the end of that performance period of performance. And then the next line, you can see that we'll be providing TA throughout the entire time, January to September, which will include during the period of performance, PLCs, the individual TA and development of TA resources. And then that final line identifies that we are planning to have some collaborative in-person events, and you'll see that they are slated for May and September. All right, I think we have a stop here for questions. Yes.
And we do have some questions in the Q&A, so let's review those. Tanya's question is pretty broad, so I think that's a good one to start with. Tanya asks, as a childcare provider, how can I be a part of this and start an FCCN? Because one thing that they know is it's needed in Lansing.
That's a great question. Joan, do you want to jump on and answer that question?
Sure. And thanks again for the question. As we said in the eligibility area, there's a couple of different ways that this could happen. One is that a group of home-based childcare providers like yourself could come together and look for a fiscal sponsor. And if that's something you'd be interested in, I'd highly encourage you to schedule some time with us during office hours so we can talk about that. The other would be to reach out to organizations that you as a childcare business owner are already connected to that support you. That might be your Great Start to Quality Resource Center. That might be an early childhood organization that's culturally specific, as we see in some areas. Like, for example, we have Bethany Christian Services that serves immigrant and refugee families. And that those organizations might not be aware that there would be such an interest by home-based childcare providers. So I think those are the 2 clearest pathways to an individual childcare business owner helping to promote an eligible organization for applying for these dollars.
Thanks, Joan. Amanda asks, are there any rules about where the 25 providers come from within the area intended to be served by the hub? For example, if they offer it for all counties, but only have 25 providers from 1 or 2 of the counties, is that okay? Or do they have to have a certain percentage from each county in their area or region?
Yeah, that's a great question, Joan. I think I got this one, and then you can jump in. Okay, so great question. I love that you're being so intentional about thinking about representation from all the counties. There is not a formal requirement. The requirement is that you are welcoming and marketing to all counties and providers in the counties. And we do hope to see representation, right? If everyone from, like, if there are folks from every county that would like to be in the network, then absolutely we want you to have representation from all the counties, but also recognizing that some counties have different populations of home-based providers and business owners, and some counties are more rural, and that can be difficult. And so we don't want to put restraints on that way. We do want you to think about representation, though, if there is the interest from all counties, which we're hoping, of course, that there is. Joan, anything you want to add on that, or?
Just a recommendation that as a part of this application process, it would be good to look at the population of home-based providers in each of your counties and your service areas to think about, you know, where would we target? Where does it seem likely that we could really gather these folks? How would we target our marketing, et cetera? And you can write about that in your application, how you considered where the home-based providers are located and how your efforts are going to make sure that you reach the people in different counties.
Great. Thanks, Joan and Courtney, for answering those questions. And thanks for those in attendance, popping those into the Q&A. Keep going. They're great. I'm going to pass it on to Andrea to start our conversation about submitting an application successfully.
Thanks, Misty. Hi, everyone. Andrea here. I'm the program grants manager here at ECIC. I'm going to talk about the application. So what we want to do is first explain the grants management system that we're using for this application, and then walk you through all the questions. So you have them ahead of time. You can really think about them in real time, and ask any questions that you have that we can clarify. And as Misty had said, it's super helpful to have your questions so we can put them in an FAQ document and send them out to everyone. So we'll start with preparing your application in Flux. We have a lovely how-to document that walks you through how to set up an account in Flux and kind of navigate the portal. That is linked within the RFP. It's also on our website. Heather just put it in the chat as well, so you have access to it there. What we're going to do is kind of switch over to the Flux portal. I just want everyone to get a look at what it looks like. So Misty is going to log in here, kind of on the back end. So first you go in and what she circled there, you're going to create an account. It's a very simple process. It's like signing up for any other kind of, website account. And then what happens on the back end is we get notification that people have registered. And then we have to go in and kind of vet people and approve their registration. So if you click an account, you will not be able to log in immediately because we have to get it on the back end and approve it. Once that happens, it will automatically send an email to you that you've been registered, you are approved, you can get into this portal that is up on the screen right here. So just making sure everyone is aware that that it's a patience thing when you sign up. So what we have here is the grants portal. This is what it's going to look like whenever you log into your account. There's this main page, there's a forum for people to post things that are public to all of the other members of each opportunity that we have, and some information about, how to submit an application, what the little tabs are on your left, things like that. The thing that I really want to bring to everyone's attention is exactly how to apply for funding and where their application is. So it's in two spots, right? So there's the apply for funding, and then once you open an application, it'll be under draft applications on the left. But so first we can go into apply for funding, and you'll see we have family childcare networks and regional childcare coalitions. We have some organizations that are interested in both opportunities, and it's also just, we'd like to keep all of the opportunities together. It's kind of how the system is set up. So you just apply for funding for whatever your organization is a part of. And so you click on the apply for funding here. Again, you can see the RFP is posted there in addition to on our website. And what this does is opens up a new application, and this is what it's going to look like. It's pretty simple, pretty self-explanatory. Of course, reach out to us if you have any questions. We will go over the questions one by one in the PowerPoint, but what you can see that Misty is showing here, yes. So for any of the narrative questions, there's a limit, 2,500 characters, and that includes spaces and punctuation. And what it's going to do is count those characters and then tell you how many are remaining, so you know where your answers are at. So we wanted to highlight that so everybody knows. And then yes, the other thing is to save. This Flux portal doesn't auto save, so we're going to want you to keep saving things. That way you don't lose any of your stuff. And then once we move into the actual implementation of this project, we will still be using Flux for some reporting stuff. It won't be the hub for absolutely everything, but this is a portal that we're going to want you to use for different reporting, SOE, statement of expenditure, sort of submitting things. We'll cover all of that stuff when we get into implementation, but wanted to familiarize you guys with this system that we have here. Yep, that's where in your draft application, you'll see your application. And then if you have any signatories or anything that are also logging into their account, they'll see that it's in draft application form. So anytime anyone that's associated with your organization logs in, they'll have the same version saved into draft if they're all linked together. Yeah, so that's our little Flux demo. What we can move on to now is the application part. We'll go dig into each one of the questions and we'll look at the points associated with those questions. And then we've got the rubrics provided there so you can see how everything is scored. There aren't too many applications associated with this opportunity, but we'll still dig into all of them. So for our selection criteria, we have a grant review and selection committee that will go through and rate all of the applications, and then we'll take all those scores together. The application maximum score is 30. Any applications that are below 20 aren't going to be funded. When we have our final group of individuals that we are recommending for funding, we will send those along to MyLeap because they have all final approval of these organizations. And then once they get back to us, then we move on to contract. So let's go into the first question. So what you'll see is the questions that are very demographic related, we don't have any scores for those. Those are just for us keeping track of that information for the application, so it doesn't hold any weight. We covered this a little bit earlier, the geographic areas of where the Family Child Care Network is going to be located, and then you're just going to be able to select which counties or which regions you're going to be serving. So you see here how we have some no points and some 5 points. So will this be a new network? It's a yes or no answer. The number of participants and the length of time that the FCCN has been in network. And then we'll have this upload a roster of participants. So within the Flex portal, there will be a membership roster template, and you'll be able to download that and fill that out with any of the Family Child Care Network participants that you have, or the home-based childcare providers that helped you fill out the application or are going to be a part of a newly established network. And you can see the demo of it here. There's a lot of information that we kind of collect there. Not so much narrative, but definitely information that we will want for every member of the network. We can move on to, oh, well, you can see the rubric, but yeah, we can move on to question 5. The question, this is another 5-point question. So one of our narrative questions, describe your experience working with home-based childcare providers, including current activities and processes for including providers as partners in decision-making, operations, and accountability. So really what we're looking for is an intentional focus on home-based childcare as a distinct, essential, and valued setting for children and families, inclusive of supporting home-based childcare. We really want to see that represented in your response to this question. Question 6, describe the FCCN's hub to racial and ethnic equity for its work with home-based childcare business owners and providers. Another narrative question that is worth 5 points. We really, again, we're looking for intentionality here. We really want to see an answer that really speaks true to the work. And then questions 7 and 8. So 7 and 8 are describe how home-based childcare business owners and providers are involved in the Family Childcare Network's decision-making. We're looking for evidence or intention for your network, depending on where things stand with your network. You know, we like to see them in maybe governing structure or, you know, where they are with the decision-making of the Family Childcare Network. And the second thing is a project plan. This is another template answer. So what you're going to do is download the required template and fill it out and then resubmit it. With this Family Childcare Network, you can see that we have it broken down by benchmarks. And then so we've got the key activity and goals, which are related to benchmarks or required aspects of the Family Childcare Network work with us in our implementation. We have indicators of quality, and then what we're going to have you fill out are the tasks, the responsible parties, the outcomes, and the deadlines. And what we really like to nail down is we love specificity. We love over communication, really provide those details. We like to see specific timeframes and specific deadlines. We also like to see those tied to actual outcomes. So the more details you can give us, the better, because we will follow up with you if we're like, oh, you know what, we're actually unclear about some of these. We really would like some more details. And then you'll upload that into Flux with that associated question. So you can see we want all of those aspects filled out in that project plan. And then question 9, staffing. So intentional is the buzzword here. Describe the intentional staffing strategies that you will use to support the goals of the project and the Family Child Care Network. So we want you to walk through how you're going to recruit, hire, train, mentor any network staff, anyone that you're working with. We like to see what the staffing strategies are. We really like to see how these staff of your network are bringing an understanding and respect for home-based childcare. And then there are reflective of the communities that are being served. So we're going to look for all of those things within this answer. And it's, it's all about being intentional, right? Just say that word a few more times. We can take a break here and see if there are any questions you have about those.
No questions so far in the Q&A. However, as you all soak in all of that lovely information Andrea just presented, feel free to pop them in the Q&A and we will get to them. We have a few more opportunities still for Q&A.
And we'll provide more information at the end of this of how you can reach out to us for more questions and setting up any meetings or anything like that. What we are going to do after that, or now, is pass it over to Kelly Kreider. Kelly Kreider is going to walk through everything related to budget, budget narrative, and risk assessment. And so with these are not scored or rated. These are something that we look at internally. These aren't something that our grant reviewers kind of process for us. But I'll pass it over to you, Kelly. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Andrea. So for this section of our presentation today, we're going to briefly look at the materials that you'll be filling out or completing and sharing some, tips for making sure you complete these items as we need to, and some other information that is helpful for you as you endeavor on working on your budget. So what Misty's showing on the screen is the template for the budget. The first tab here is the summary. And I'll call your attention to the orange block at the top. We have over, the many months received several submissions without that information, and it saves some back and forth to just make sure you please complete columns B and D with information about your organization. The section below will auto-populate. It will pull numbers through from the budget detail tab. So Misty's showing here an example of the budget detail. There is a tab that is blank, and that's the one that you will fill out. Thank you, Misty. It's organized by section or line item or category. You'll see those labels in column A. So when you hear line item or category, those are the sections that we are talking about. For each line item, you'll need to populate a brief detail in the column that's being highlighted with the corresponding budget in column D. Each of those cost lines will automatically total for each line item as you enter. And if you have more lines than are represented here, please do feel free to add additional lines. We'd rather you do that than try to group things. Sometimes it makes sense to group, but most often it's most helpful if you break them apart. One thing to note is that it's really important that anything that you reflect here on your budget detail is also included in the budget narrative. That is a separate document. We'll show an example momentarily. But we will go through those side by side and make sure that the numbers match, that the items match, and that we can see that one-to-one correspondence. The narrative document is the opportunity to provide more detail and an explanation of how you've come up with your budget numbers. All budget proposals need to reflect direct costs for implementing the proposed scope of work. All expenses must be allowable, reasonable, and allocable per federal uniform guidance. And if you do have shared costs in your organization, that are included in your budget, they must directly benefit the project implementation or be captured under indirect, which we'll talk about shortly. We can look at each section. If Misty, you want to show us the example again. For salaries, we're going to be looking to see all positions listed that will be funded for this project. We will provide a guidance document as well following the webinar that gives you more information about each of the line items and how to either considerations and or the level of detail required for the narrative. So here you can see we've listed the position, the FTE, and the related salary. In the narrative, we'll show you a chart or a table that has even more detail so that we can track staff across multiple funding opportunities. So you may provide more detail here if that's helpful for you organizationally, but at minimum, this is the information we need to see. In the fringe benefit section, you'll see there are 2 examples for how you can reflect your fringe benefits. If your fringe rates are over 35%, they do need to be broken down. Otherwise, they can be rolled up as an example too. But ideally, or not ideally, I should say, however your general ledger is collected or reflects your fringe benefits, that's how we want to see them broken out. For travel, again, you'll see the general line items we have. Some of these may be applicable to the proposed work. Some of it may not be for your organization, and that's okay. In the narrative, that will be your opportunity and to really expand on what are you intending to do in that 6-month period of performance for travel. Anything that you capture in the travel section should only be for funded staff. So anybody who's listed in the salary section and will have travel related to this project, that's the budget information you will provide here. We'll talk about where to provide any information for travel for childcare providers or others in a moment. But in the narrative, it will be very important that you describe the nature of travel, where are you planning to go, when, the reason, number of people traveling, and the rates for each of these categories if you have a budget for them. If your organization doesn't have a travel policy that outlines or provides you with the guidance for rates, you will need to defer to the Department of Technology Management and Budget, or DTMB, for those allowable costs, and we can share that information if need be. For general supplies, we will ask that you break apart or separate consumable and non-consumable supplies. Consumables are going to be anything that will be used up. Non-consumables are the things that are purchased but not steps, such as the examples here, hardware, things related to monitor, mouse, things like that. You may opt to put subscriptions like Office 365 that we have shown here. can put that in supplies, or you might reflect that under miscellaneous, whatever makes the most sense for your organization's practices. For equipment, for per uniform guidance, there is a very specific definition, and we've got that noted here as anything with a per unit cost of $10,000 or more. So if you do not intend, or you're not budgeting for anything of that dollar amount, we'll ask you very specifically to put no equipment will be purchased for this project. Excuse me, both in your budget document as well as the narrative. That helps ensure that we've got it documented for all of our records. We have seen some examples where people are tempted or their inclination may be to put computer equipment under this line item, but really that should be under the non-consumables if you have those expenses. Moving down the line here, we've got contract services. Under contract services, we'll ask you put each contractor's name. And if you don't know, it's okay to put to be determined or kind of the more generic intention, but we do need a description so we know what that service is providing. Again, this is an area you may have very few contractors or you may have several, in which case, please, again, do add lines. We need to capture each contractor individually, unless they're of a nature like the trainers and speakers, where it's small enough that they would maybe be invoicing you, or you have a much smaller grouping of expenses. As we look at miscellaneous, these are some possible miscellaneous expenses you might have in your budget. Some of these may not apply to the work. This is an example that we use across several opportunities. So you may have expenses that aren't reflected here. So as long as the expense is an allowable expense, it's something we will consider. And if it fits within your budget and you need it, again, as a direct cost for program implementation, then it is something that can be considered. Don't feel that you have to have all of these things if they aren't applicable to your work or your organization. But it is important and helpful that you break them out rather than grouping them into larger buckets. So again, if you need to add lines, please do so. On the budget narrative, one of the things we'll really look for is an explanation of how you came up with the costs. So you can see there is a truncated version next to some of these items here, but we'll look at an example in a moment on the narrative. And then the last section, or last tab here is indirect costs. And the only action you need to take here is to enter the indirect rate that you may be electing in that yellow cell. The maximum indirect rate is 15%. That is the federally set de minimis rate. And we do use based on modified total direct costs. So that may be a term you're familiar with or that your finance folks are familiar with. It essentially means can allow for indirect on certain costs and not on others, such as there is a cap of up to $50,000 on subcontracts. Beyond that, indirect can't be drawn, as well as participant support costs. We cannot draw indirect on those expenses. So this tab will do all of those calculations for you. We just need to make sure the indirect rate is captured. Misty, if we can go back to the example tab, the detail example tab. I do want to talk briefly under miscellaneous about the participant support costs. You heard my colleagues speak earlier about the requirement that we compensate childcare providers for their time participating in the network events. And that may be set up a number of different ways. but those costs should be bucketed. As you can see on this example, there was nothing budgeted here, but that will be an expectation we look for this opportunity. In either your narrative or the budget template here, you can break those out if that's helpful for your planning. We will expect to see much more detail in the narrative about how you've arrived at that number. If you break it out, we will ultimately bucket those all as participant support costs. But participant support costs, as broadly defined, are any monetary supports for might be parent leaders or childcare providers to participate in the work, such as stipends, travel allowances, registration fees. So anything that you pay directly to or on behalf of the provider needs to be captured here. So this we have seen in the past, entities may be thinking they need to put travel expenses for their network members in the travel section, and those would actually show up in the participant support costs. Travel expenses should only be for staff funded by this opportunity. I think we can look at the narrative example now. Again, we'll be providing a follow-up document that gives the guidance and instruction on both of these, but this is an example we've prepared to help illustrate the level of detail that we're looking for. Again, this is an example, so some of it is going to be applicable to this funding opportunity, some of it's not. And you may elect to prepare your narrative in any form that is helpful to you and your organization. You can add a new tab to the budget document. You can structure it completely different as long as you have each of the line items or categories represented and the level of detail required. It doesn't matter the format that you prepare. So you can see the salaries. I had mentioned earlier that we would show you a table, an example of how you would include or could include all of the information required. So in the budget, we just listed the role and the FTE and how much would be funded by the grant. Here, we've got much more information. We need names as well as annual salary, and the responsibility is incredibly helpful because it helps us know if this is a position that should or should not be funded based on the level of work provided to the specific project. And then as we scroll down, you'll see this is how we've shown the detail for fringe. For travel, we've provided an overview of what, in this example, we would be expecting to travel broadly. I'm sorry, meeting the request of who's traveling for what and when, and then the travel rate breakdown. And then for supplies, you can see where we've shown the examples of how we arrived at those numbers or the justification for the expense. So that may be on a per FTE basis. It may be based on similar prior purchases. You may have a quote. You may have an already established contract with someone. You might have a subscription already. So again, we really want to know, how did you come up with that number? You can see for equipment, again, we've reflected the matching, no equipment's purchased, will be purchased for this project. And then I think we've probably covered most of all the things I wanted to highlight here. Under indirect, we're just noting what the what indirect will be applied, and then budget total. So that should match. Again, we want to see all those numbers match between the two documents. So both the budget and budget narrative will be uploaded into the Flex portal. So once you have those completed, those will be uploaded there. And then a component of your application is the subrecipient risk assessment questionnaire. And you can see here,
It's loading. Very patient.
excuse me, where you will, this is where you'll upload the budget information. You can download both of the templates and the instructions, and then upload those completed documents. So for the risk assessment, there is a link. You could see a little tiny link, hyperlink there. This will take you to a Microsoft form. It looks like a survey or a questionnaire, and it can be completed by anyone within your organization, whomever's most applicable to answer these questions. But this questionnaire really helps us understand different aspects of your operations and finances. It also gives us the opportunity to know, do you have a procurement policy? Have you had a recent audit? Because both of those items will also be required to be uploaded into the organizational documents section of Flux. Your procurement policy does need to align with uniform guidance to ensure we're following the requirements for federal spending. And that you'll also upload your most recent audited financial documents and single audit if applicable. And if your organization has recently, within this fiscal year or this last quarter, completed a risk assessment for ECIC for another funding opportunity, we will be adding a question in Flux so that you can indicate that. And then we won't have to complete the risk assessment again. We'll go and find your prior responses. So we will ask for you to look at, review the questionnaire just to make sure nothing has changed for your organization, or that you may want to expand on or answer differently. If everything is the same as you answered last time, then we'll go ahead and pull down those answers for you.
All right, now we have some time for some Q&A. There are no additional open questions that have been entered at this time. So we will continue to watch the Q&A as we make our way through the remaining content, which I have the privilege to lead. Let's talk all about our application review and selection process here at ECIC's Child Care Innovation Fund. In the fund, we implement and engage a 4-step review process. It starts with a review for minimum qualifications. A review for minimum qualifications is conducted by our internal team and with support from our compliance department, Andrea, who you heard from earlier. And when we're reviewing for minimum qualifications, we're really looking for the most basic things. We're looking for completeness of the application that was submitted. That includes all attachments have been completed and uploaded, attached to the application that was submitted. It ensures that we have relevant contact information required, and it also makes sure that you're an eligible applicant for the opportunity. In the event that you don't pass minimum qualifications, we wouldn't proceed to step 2A. Instead, you would receive information from us indicating that you're either not eligible, or it would just simply be outreach from us saying, hey, we need this additional information from you before we can proceed with our individual review, which brings me into step 2A. We then collect those applications that have passed minimum qualifications, and we disperse them amongst our application review and selection committee for individual review. That means that each member of our review and selection committee gets applications to review individually on their own and score before we move then into small group consensus, which is step 2B. So after all of our applications have been individually scored by the review and selection committee members, those members come together in small groups to come to consensus on all scores for all the rubrics that you all saw earlier. So that means we're talking with each other. We're saying, hey, does this score work for you? If not, let's talk through what we could come to consensus and agreement upon. And that results in the final score for each application. Once we have those final scores, those applicants who have scored at the identified mark that they need to score at to be moved forward for recommendation are then moved on to step 3, where we compile that list and we recommend those applicants for funding to MyLeap, who then makes the final approval for a list of those selected. That's step 4. And and you saw very much earlier in the presentation that amongst our priorities, we always are continuously centering equity in everything we do. That includes our application review and selection process. I want to talk about how we do that on the Innovation Fund. So the first 4 bubbles that you see on the slide, the 3 blue and the 1 purple, are all things that happen before any individual review is taken of an application that's been submitted. So first off, we have all of our reviewers complete and sign a conflict of interest form before we assign any applications, so that we know where applications should and shouldn't go. We want to ensure that we're not, that we are integrating this mitigation of bias that might be present. We know the world of early childhood is small. This is something that's important in any grant review process. Then we conduct internal training of all of our reviewers. It's really important that we're able to get in front of them and say, hey, this is how we do an equitable grant review process. We talk about how to score using the rubrics that have been published. We talk about what bias looks like right in that training. We show videos of educational resources that address this particular piece on mitigating personal biases in grant review. And that is the educational resources purple box here. Not only do we provide it within the training, we also provide resources outside of the training that we ask folks to review and reference as needed. And then finally, before you're getting to that individual application review in our Flux portal, there is one final conflict of interest acknowledgement directly within the portal. This helps us create a stopgap for those things that might happen where you filled out your conflict of interest form as a reviewer, but you forgot one thing, and it is attached to this application you're supposed to review. So we're catching those last minute possible forgetful elements that you might have not included in a conflict of interest form to make sure that we're really upholding the integrity of anti-bias grant review. Also, as you heard, I just described our multi-step review process, where multiple reviewers are scoring the same applications. They're looking at the same content. We use that in conjunction with our identification, or with our small group consensus scoring, to identify any divergent scores that might come up as a part of this process. And that does happen. And that helps us really set a level set on what the true score should be, and pull out those things that might be outliers so that we can get to a more equitable score. And then lastly, as you saw in this webinar, and you can find on our web pages, we publish our rubrics and all the criteria we use for scoring, so that we can ensure we are being transparent and how we're scoring, and so that we can ensure that applicants understand how to get the highest score. And lastly, we've been talking about this slide here and there throughout the webinar. How can you receive additional assistance with submitting a successful application? The first route, and what I would always suggest as your first order of business, is to search out our supportive documents and materials that are posted on our website. That includes the RFP associated with this opportunity, which Heather posted in the chat for you to reference. Always go there to answer your questions. We are in development of an FAQ document, which it will also include the questions you all asked today. And hopefully it would be supportive and maybe answering some questions that arise as you get into the development of your application. Of course, we're recording this webinar, and we will be posting this webinar along with the slides on our website as well. And you will also find in the chat the Flux how-to document. Helps you understand exactly how to get into the platform, what things to look out for, how to apply, where to go. So I would highly suggest looking through those things first. If you still have questions, which is very likely you will or may, please email us at technicalassistance@ecicforkids.org. That email will be posted in the chat as well. Please send any and all inquiries there. The other really cool thing that we are committed to on the Innovation Fund is responding to those emails promptly within 24 to 48 business hours. The thing that you can do through the technical assistance inbox is request office hours. And office hours are virtual 15-minute appointments that occur via Zoom, and they're intended to be able to discuss face-to-face what questions you might have related to your application, related to the project itself, related to collaboration and connection. Any way that we can help support you, we're here to do that. And we're hoping that we do that in a seamless way. So when you request office hours, you'll receive a link to schedule. You'll use that link to find a time that works best for you, and then you'll receive an invite to attend that meeting. Of course, like I said, they must be requested via email at technicalassistance@ecicforkids.org. And they can be extended. So though they are 15-minute appointments, and that's the intention, is to make them kind of short and sweet so we can get right to the point and help you on your way, they can be extended if you have a more complex question or a few different questions that you'd like to address with the team. And this will be the last opportunity to answer any questions you might have in the Q&A. I'm not seeing any right now. However, I do want to give a brief 30-second pause as we have presented a lot of information for you all. So please do enter any questions that are unanswered into the Q&A now. Thirty seconds feels like a lot of time when there's a lot of silence. Again, please, no pressure to enter any questions. However, if there are some last minute things you'd like to know, we'd be happy to answer them. In the meantime, as you absorb all of this information, again, reach out to technical assistance. We'll be happy to answer your questions there. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Joan, who will be closing us out.
Just want to thank everyone for making the time to join us today. We're very excited about your interest in this opportunity. We look forward to supporting you during the application period. So please reach out. Office hours are not a one-time thing. You're welcome to schedule more than one time. So please do take care, and look forward to this webinar and the slides being posted on our website soon.